Hello and good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to be back working on our sphere. Again, my name is Mandy Tice. I am the director of the School of Atelier Arts. I run an online atelier where I teach people how to draw and paint realistically. And today, what we're going to do is we are going to continue working on our sphere painting. Now, some people may look at this sphere and be like, oh, it's done, right? It's covered. But the thing about atelier training is that we can push things so much further than we think that we can, right? That's a big part of the training. Excuse me. And good morning, Magritte. Good morning, Peter. Good to see you all. Um, so what we're going to do today is we are really going to start working on how do we refine these ideas of what we have? How do we make it better without ruining the hard work that we've done? Warning, warning, warning. A lot of people at this point will have this beautiful tile work, and then on the next pass, which we're about to start, they'll start smushing it all together and lose all the beautiful nuance. Remember that form turns in all directions. So it's going, across this way and this way and this way, which means in theory, no two tiles are the same, right? Because this part of the sphere is closer to the light than this part of the sphere. So this has to be lighter. And if we start smushing this all together, it makes this and this the same color. And we know that they are not, and that kills our form. And good morning, Leela and Ellen. So happy to have you back. So when I was going live this morning, I noticed something, and this happened to me when I was in my studies, and it's happening to me now. And I noticed it, and I wanted to point it out to you. When you paint in grisaille, your eye starts thinking grisaille, and be very careful what input you give your eyes, especially as artists, training in the atelier, because you are affected by what you allow into your vision. And what I mean by that is what I noticed this morning when I woke up is that I was wearing a black shirt, a gray sweater, a grayish blue headband, right? Like I've started dressing en grisaille. Right. And when I was in the atelier, we painted in grisaille for an entire year. You did nothing but paint in black and white for an entire year. My entire wardrobe lost all of its color. So I'm pointing it out because I noticed it again, and I was surprised because we've only been painting in grisaille for a couple of weeks now, but it does affect you. Like people think that what they see, doesn't get to them. All these advertisements that we see all the time doesn't get to them, but you are heavily affected visually by everything you allow into your eyes, into your sight. I once trained in an atelier where somebody had brought in an artist that the person running the atelier didn't think was very good, like a magazine or a book or something. And he's like, get that garbage out of here. Don't pollute your eyes with that. Right. Now, that was like a really extreme version of that. But at the time, I'm like, this guy's crazy. But now I see and understand, maybe that's a little extreme, but I do understand, especially as students, what you're looking at really matters. And that's why, aside from copyright issues, we focus on old masterwork that stood the test of time, because I want to make sure that we're giving your eyes the very, very best. So for example, in the online painting boot camp, we start with master copies that have been vetted to make sure that we are putting good information into our eyes. And yeah, Marguerite, that's funny. Yeah. Oh, and Peter says his wife's closet is all grisaille. That's funny. Does she paint in grisaille, perhaps? So anyways, that was my little reminder this morning that be careful what you put in your vision. Try to make your space as beautiful as you can. Try to, wear clothes that you find truly beautiful. Try to look at things that are truly beautiful. Go to the museums, feed your eye the very best that you can, because if you aspire to beauty, you need to absorb beauty. And unfortunately, in our contemporary world, there's a lot of visual ugliness out there. Any billboard pretty much counts as that for me. So try to feed yourself. You have to be proactive. Feed your eyes a healthy diet of beauty. Okay. So today we're getting into the sphere and we need some big ideas to guide us, right? If we just go in and be like, oh, I don't like this tile. Oh, I want to move this. Oh, I want to do that. We're going to end up with a smushy mess, right? And we're going to lose all this beautiful work we spent an entire week doing, right? More than a week, I think. So, what we want to make sure of is that we have a plan before we ever put our paintbrush to the canvas. So let me rotate this around here. Okay, so we have something that's pretty good. Now, when you're trying to evaluate the big idea, sometimes it's really helpful to squint, right? And we talked about that atelier squint where you close your eyes as tight as you possibly can, and then you barely open them, and you can see through your eyelashes, and it helps you see. And one thing I'm seeing is that it feels like my sphere has a little bit of a dent right here. Do you guys see that? Let me know in the chat if you can see what I'm seeing. Like it's almost like it got a little bit light right here, and it's almost making a little point right there in my sphere. So that's the first thing I'm noticing. Next thing I'm noticing is that it feels like my core shadow is a little bit on the dark side. I feel like I could lighten it a little bit. Excuse me. Oh, Ellen, notice I moved my plant. I don't know if you noticed, but I have not been a very good waterer of my plant, and it was looking very sad. But great observational skills, Ellen. I'm one of those people that loves plants and murders them. I just really struggle with keeping plants alive. I can keep them alive long enough to paint them, and that's about it. Yeah, it's been bothering me too. Okay, all right. So back to the sphere. All right, so I'm kind of getting this indent here. Now the question really is this too light or is everything else too dark? And I am suspicious that my core shadow is a little bit dark. And if I lighten my core shadow, then the rest of the sphere would be a little bit lighter. And this wouldn't look like an indent then. It would, if I made things around it lighter, then it would stop looking like a dent in my sphere. So that's one option. Keep in mind that whenever you find a problem, all right, everybody focus because this is really important. I say this all the time to my students in the online Atelier Painting Bootcamp, and I'm saying it to you now, like, pay attention. This is like the best gift I can think of to give you. When you find a problem, you are going to instantly think of one solution to the problem. But there's almost always multiple solutions that will fix that problem, and you need to find the correct solution. So, for example, in the sphere, the problem that I've identified is it feels denty here. The tempting thing to do would be to just darken this area, right? But is the problem that this is too light, or is the problem that everything else is too dark, right? And we want the sphere to read white at the end of the day. It's already reading a little bit on the dirty side. If we make it even darker, it's going to look dirtier and not white. Whereas if we lighten everything, it fixes two problems. It makes this feel lighter and it gets rid of our dent. Okay, so just because you identify a problem and just because you identify one way to correct the problem does not mean it's the correct way. And what happens is in critiques, sometimes I will tell students, this is the problem, and then they'll correct it, creating a new problem, right? If I corrected this by darkening it, now I have a new problem, right? That my sphere is too dark. So it's really, really important that you are mindful that our job is to find mistakes, correct mistakes, but correct mistakes the correct way. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Okay, so what I suspect to be true is that my core shadow is a little dark and therefore my sphere is a little bit dark overall, and that if I lighten everything, then it will feel more light. Okay, good. Leo is with me. Excellent. Okay, so Peter has something interesting in the chat. He's saying a different approach, a series of planes perpendicular to the direction of light will show all points are equivalent equidistant to the light. They should be the same value. I'm not exactly sure what he's saying there. I think what you're saying is that if we think of these as a bunch of little planes going around the sphere, that any plane that is tilted the same amount away from the light will be a similar value. Feel free to clarify that in the chat. Um, I find that with the sphere, the hardest thing to convince students is that even though this is pretty close to the same distance as this, that they are not the same in value, because this is still closer to the light than, say, up here. Okay, yeah, I'm misunderstanding Peter. Feel free to try again. I might be intentionally dense, or not intentionally dense. What's the words are hard this morning. I might not be fully awakened in my mind, so please feel free to try again. Meanwhile, all right, so I want to identify any potential problem I see while I have my fresh eyes, right? When you wake up in the morning, your eyes have not been polluted by your subject for hours like they normally are when you're painting. So it's the best time to identify anything that just kind of itches at the back of your brain a little bit, like, so we talked about this dent. We talked about how it's not really reading white, that it's kind of is, but we could really emphasize the white. All right, so Peter's suggesting go around the sphere at the same distance from the light. I'm sorry, but I still don't know what you want me to do. We might have to have a side quest here, Peter. All right, we'll circle back to that, but I just want to get into the light for now. Okay, so we want this unity of light and shadow, and we do have some unity. If we squint our eyes, this is clearly reading as a light, this is reading as a shadow. But this reflected light is reading really strong. So do we darken the reflected light, or will lightening the shadow kind of make this contrast less, and then it'll feel more unified? So we've identified the key big problems. Now, something else I want you to really notice that's going to be a problem for us, and this kind of thing really messes with students' heads, is when I look at my sphere, okay, I want you to tell me which is lighter and which is darker. Is the background on this side of the sphere darker or lighter than the shadow part of my sphere? So is the background lighter or darker than my sphere here? Is the background darker or lighter than the shadow side of the sphere? That is the question. Okay, now the background looks lighter, but when you squint your eyes, this background should be approximately the same color as our core shadow, right? So it's actually a little bit darker than our sphere, and it should be similar to the core shadow. Now, if I were to darken it to the core shadow color, it would be way too dark. It'd be way darker than the sphere. It's only a little bit darker than the sphere. So that's another indication that my core shadow is just a little bit on the dark side, that I can lighten it. Exactly. Oh, and Ellen, you're doing something really amazing here. Ellen's saying, I see it both ways, right? And it's true, because there is a strong reflected light right here. And then there's less reflected light up here. So you could make the argument that this very part of the shadow is darker than the background, but the background is darker here. And that happens because, remember, there's a gradient in the background. And also, you could consider this core shadow to be a gradient kind of filtering out to each side. So it changes on us, right? And it can be very confusing if you do not have a set idea in your head about what's what, right? So that's why we spend all this time talking. We've been talking for 15 minutes. We haven't even put a dab of paint onto our canvas because we need to know what's what, right? Okay, all this being said, where do I start if I'm going to fix this, right? because there are two things I've identified that I want to fix. I want to make the sphere feel lighter overall, which means pretty much the second pass is going to be lighter than the first pass. And this core shadow is a little bit on the dark side. Now, when you have a blank canvas, I almost always encourage students to start from the core shadow and work to the light. However, if you have a situation where you've done that and things are too dark, a great way to lighten everything is to start from the light and go to the shadow, right? I don't know why it works that way, but I think it's just easier to spread the light towards the shadow than to try to add light from the shadow side. Okay, and Neola says something really important in the chat. She's like, "We're judging the painting, not the subject." LOL. Yeah. And this painting is really a combination of theory and observation, right? So we know in theory what must be true about light, and also we're observing it. So those are all good points. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually start from the light, and I am going to tile into the shadow. Now, because this is a second pass, I'm going to use my smaller brush, and I'm going to be mindful about knitting my tiles together a little bit. But the great thing about lightening everything is that I have this guide underneath me, and I just need to make it like a half a step lighter all the way across, right? Working from the light to the shadow. All right. Again, anytime you're working on lights, you can build up the lights. So the number of layers in the lights will make a difference. So I'm going to start by just restating my lightest bit with some nice thick white paint. Now I do have a little bit of texture on my canvas right now, in part because for this demo, I was trying to make sure to keep each tile very, very clean. And there are some edges on my tiles that if I were doing this just for me, I would have knocked back, but I didn't want to show you the knocking back because I didn't want you to start smudging your tiles together. It's much better to have a little bit of edge and clean tile notes, especially on your first time attempting to tile and attempting to do a sphere like this, than to try to smush them all together, because students inevitably start doing a smushy circle thing. All right. For those of you who have started painting a sphere at home, how many of you did the circle smudgy thing? It's hard not to do. It requires so much discipline. And we think that we can just get away with it. Like, oh, just one smudge. And the next thing you know, you're smudging to the next tile and the next tile. Peter's saying that he's guilty of this. Yeah. There were a few students in the online atelier that had smudged some of their tiles together too. So you're not alone. But the good thing, especially when you're in the online boot camp class, is that you get me like helping you along and keeping some guardrails on you, letting you know before you do it to the whole sphere that like, okay, slow down. Get your tiles in. Leola did it too. Yeah, it's okay. Almost everybody does it on their first sphere. And that's why in the atelier, most of the times the ateliers that do this project will actually have you paint it 3 times. Once on a black background, once on a white background, and once on a middle value background. Not to torture the students, but because it takes a few attempts to get it, and once you go through this entire process once, try it again. Maybe take a week off, right? But try it again, and you'll be amazed at like how much more your brain has processed the second time you go through it, because you've gone through the whole process. You know where you're going. The first time you do it, you're just blindly following me, hoping that I don't lead you astray, right? The second time, you have more information to work off of. Okay. All right, so I'm going to work from my shadow to my light, and I'm just trying to, or sorry, from my light to my shadow rather, and I'm just trying to put down a value that's 1 step lighter than what was there before. Maybe even just a half step, not very much. Now, it's really important that you have your visual memory really keyed in, because especially because we have an underpainting here, like our first pass, it can be really easy to get lost when you start going into your second pass. Like you cannot find your brush stroke sometimes. Okay, so do you see how I'm just making things a little bit lighter than what's underneath it? A half step maybe. Okay, so I'm working across here. And this can be really scary part of the process because right now it looks like a sphere. And when we put this pass in here, it's going to kill the form until, oops, that was too light. It's going to kill the form until we get a lot of the sphere covered with our second pass. All right, so the first attempt was too light. This stroke is too dark. I need something in between. It's still too dark. All right, and this is called spreading the light. When we start from the light side and we just make every stroke one step lighter. That was a little bit dark. But this requires visual discipline and visual memory because it's so easy to forget where you are on this pass. Still too dark. That was a touch on the light side. All right, so it's not a ton lighter, but we do want it to read lighter overall. That was too dark. The second, and now that's too light, right? So somewhere in between those two. The second pass is so much more difficult because it's easy to get lost, then we get frustrated, then we put a wrong tile down, and the next thing you know, we're smudging things around, right? So as long as you're not smudging, you're winning. You can always, even if you totally mess up this pass, you can always put another pass over it, right? But if you start smudging around, you're going to lose all this good underpainting. It got a little bit dark on this side. Okay. No, that's too light. Don't panic. Just keep thinking one tile at a time and you'll be fine. Okay, so now we're close to the core shadow, and I did say I wanted to lighten my core shadow slightly. So I'm going to take my core shadow up one value step. All right. And do you see how already just with this one pass, our light feels more brilliant? It's feeling brighter. It's feeling like the sphere went from a dirty sphere to a white sphere just with that one pass. So Peter is asking, can't a circle of equal values be blended? Absolutely not. Do not do this. Because even if you had a circle equidistant around the center, this side of the circle is closer to the light source than this side. And you're going to lose this really beautiful nuanced form, right? If you want cartoony form, do it in circles and spread it out. If you want a really believable sphere in an environment, you have to treat each part of the sphere as its own thing. And also it's individually its own thing and also unified under one big light shape. Sorry, that was a harsh answer, but it's true. And it's also a very good question. Leal is saying, it's amazing to me to watch you and hear you as your trained eye immediately sees when the value is off and when it is correct. Yes, it took me 5 to 6 years in full-time training in various ateliers all over the country and all over the world to learn how to do this. And I would not be able to do this if I didn't have instructors with eyes that were trained better than mine to coach me, right? That's the problem with not actually training with an atelier trained person, is that you'll do your best match at home. And I hope that you're all learning a lot. And I hope that you're learning more than you knew before you came in here. And I think that's a really wonderful thing. But to paint at this level, you need someone's eye to coach you, right? Like you can't coach yourself to have a better eye than you already have, right? You need someone whose eye is trained better to keep nudging you to see things differently, especially in your own work, and to get the feedback on your own work. That's why I set up the online atelier, is because to really reach this level of mastery, you need someone's eye that's trained better than you. I don't know how else to say. It's just that's why this training was passed down for generation to generation, from master artist to apprentice, right? And that's essentially what the atelier system still is. But it requires that constant feedback between teacher and student, until about 5 years in, the student becomes resentful and is like, I'm going to go do my own thing and you can't tell me what to do anymore. And I'm one of those students, right? Like you have to get to the point where you feel resentful of your instructor before you've had enough, in my opinion. That's how I see it play out in the ateliers. Ellen's saying, yeah, that makes sense. That's just how it is, right? Okay, so back to the circle thing. Peter's saying, got it. The mistake was thinking the equal values formed a circle, and it does not. That is correct. Yay. Big jump in thinking right there, because I mean, there are a lot of really successful professional artists that don't know what you now know, right? I cannot emphasize enough how rare atelier training is and how hard it is to access it, right? I mean, it barely survived the 1980s. There were kind of only like 2 places that Westerners had access to get this training, and they were training like maybe 20 students in the 80s, right? Like it's amazing. The internet is amazing. We live in this magical time where we have broader access to this knowledge, and yet we actually have fewer trained artists as a percentage of the communities than we did 100 years ago. It's like the only art form that is less technically capable than it was 100 years ago, like as a whole. But you have access to atelier training. You're watching these videos. Like this is more access to more knowledge than the majority of the people in the world who are trying to paint and draw realistically have. So that's pretty amazing. Oh, Ellen's being funny. She's saying that few things, including myself, barely survived the 80s. I'm an 80s baby. Like I have a few vague memories of the 80s. I was actually named after the Barry Manilow song. So you can't get more 80s than that, I think. Okay, so anyways, we have this pass. We're spreading the light. And do you see how just having the second pass, even though I still have clean notes, that it's starting to feel more smooth because it's showing through a little bit of what's underneath it. Leo's like, I thought so. Although, did you know the Barry Manilow song? This is what I was told. I'm not sure about the sources. But the original song was "Oh Brandy," and it was written about a dog. So actually, I'm named after a dog. Okay. Fun fact of the day. Okay, so I'm just going to keep doing the same thing, just like I did when I was starting from my shadow side to my light, except for this time, I'm thinking about spreading my light into my shadow areas, still going one strip at a time, right? All right, so when we go from light to shadow, really I have this triangle in here. So do I start on the triangle or I do my next strip? So what I like to do on a second pass is slightly different than the first pass. I like to make a strip here and then a strip here and then fill in the triangle, and then do another strip here and then fill in the triangle, right? So I'm going to work just a little bit different. Oh, Peter, I see what you did there. He says that's rough. I love a good pun. I am such a sucker for a pun, like all day, every day. Like, don't try to convince me it's the lowest form of humor. I adore them. Okay, so what I'm gonna do next is I'm gonna do this strip here, and then I'm just gonna fill in this triangle shape. So I'm starting again back at my white. And another trick that people don't often know is that the bigger area you make your lightest value, the brighter it'll feel. So I'm not just using one um, tile of white. I'm really, my pure white is now taking up about this area. And that's called spreading the light. And that just makes it feel brighter. That like the area that you allow to be your brightest bright, the more you spread it, the brighter it'll feel. And the same is true with chromas. If you have just a little speck of chroma, it's not going to read that bright. If you exaggerate, especially on a highlight, like if you actually make the highlight go outside the outline of your silver cup or whatever it is that you're painting, it'll feel brighter. Like look up Chardin, when he paints metal surfaces, almost always his highlights exceed the outline of the cup itself. So Marguerite's asking a really great question. She's asking, how many value steps do I have on my light side? Really what's happening is this is my pure white, and I've kind of started creating a gradient to my number one and my number two from my white. So I'm really getting about 3 or 4 steps in between my number one and my number three. So I'm sneaking an extra step in. Never be afraid to mix up more piles too. Like just because we use a 9-step value scale as our baseline doesn't mean that we can't when we're working in lights, mix up a few extra piles. If that helps you, do that, right? You could mix up 10 steps between your one and your two. That's totally valid. And Ellen has something to say too, that when I do this triangle method, it makes it easier to reference what goes inside without getting so lost. And that's absolutely true. All right, be careful too. Some of my paint is wet underneath here, and that can create a tacky surface and can sometimes pull up the painting underneath. I have enough experience painting on tacky paint that I'm going to power through, especially because this is a demo. But for students, I recommend that if something's tacky underneath, leave it be and work on a different area of your painting until it dries, because it's hard enough to learn how to do this anyways. Don't make it harder on yourself by fighting tacky paint on top of it. And Marguerite has a really good point too. She's saying it'd be so tempting to make your tiles larger instead of mixing more steps, right? That's definitely true. That's something that students fall into a lot. Um, but keep in mind that if you want really nuanced form, that happens from from not missing any value, right? Like when you make big jumps, you have less sophisticated form. The smoother your transitions, the more nuanced your form. So right now, I'm just thinking, make everything about a half a step lighter than what's underneath it. That was too dark. All right, and that's too light. So that's a big jump too light. So be patient with yourself, fix a tile if it's a little bit off as you go. Still a little bit on the light side. One problem that students tend to have when they're doing a second pass is that they'll match everything underneath it instead of actually lightening it or darkening it or whatever the corrective action was prescribed, right? Because it's really easy to fall back into what you've already done instead of changing it slightly. All right, now this had formerly been the tile that was too light, but do you see how, because I lightened all of this, now that's exactly the color I need it to be in exactly the right place? And now, if I lighten the other side of it slightly, it'll all fall into place. Right, but a lot of students would have darkened that tile instead of lightening everything else, right? So it's about not just seeing the problem, but correcting the problem in the right way. Oh, that was too light. It is very, very windy here today. I hope that that sound isn't getting picked up on the audio. Are you guys getting interference? It's like literally howling like in a cartoon, like, ooh. um, yeah, I mean, the tiles do tend to get bigger when you're making corrections, but just try not to fall into the trap of the woot, 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 woot thing, you know? If you can avoid the woot, woot trap, then you'll be okay. And again, we are lightening our core shadow about one value as well. Do you see just how much more nuanced these two strips are, right? That we're just really getting a nicer form. Now, off the top of my head, this is feeling a little light, but I'm not sure that it is. And it's much better to fill in the triangle before making it because it could just feel a little light here because it's surrounded on both sides by something that's a little too dark. All right. So we may end up darkening a couple tiles here because it looks like it got darker, and then this one tile is still too light here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill in my triangle first, and that'll inform me about whether that is too light or too dark. It's tempting for students to be like, no, and then they, smush it all together, and we know that we don't want to smush it all together, right? So I'm going to do these, fill in the triangle, and then I suspect we will darken this part just a touch, but I want to do this triangle part first. Okay, thank you, Magritte. And Leola. I'm glad, and Ellen. I'm glad. I didn't want to like ruin this whole video by having like the haunted sounds. I don't know. I used to do these like really highly produced videos, but then you may have noticed that I haven't made one in a decade. And I realized, you know what? I just want to teach. I need the simplest setup possible. This live stream automatically puts it in the setup. I don't have to deal with much tech, and it just does the thing. And I teach more, and I'm able to give more knowledge this way. So I know it's a little bit low tech. I don't have a special microphone or stuff, but I found that I just wasn't doing what I needed to do when I had that barrier of entry to start painting every day. When I can just open my computer, press play, you all show up, I paint, then we get painting done. We learn real good. Okay. So we've spent 12 hours or so on this sphere already, and we have quite a bit of time to go. I think I mentioned it before, but in Atelier, it's not uncommon for you to spend 40 hours on a sphere, right? Or more than 40 hours. A month working on it for a couple hours a day is not uncommon at all. So, we in the Atelier, we start slow so that we can finish fast, right? We've done a lot of important thinking. Now we can just focus on this one pass. I have an edge here. On this pass, I am going to knock down my edges. Um, Now that's feeling a little light. So when I say knock down my edges, I'm just taking the corner of my brush and pulling up any kind of ridge that my paint's making. And I can even use the corner of my brush to dampen those ridges down. Now, I started dampening ridges and I'm noticing ridges up here, but don't do one thing at a time, right? So I'm going to finish this triangle and then I'll knock back those ridges up there. But don't get distracted. Oh, see, I was distracted. I was thinking of these ridges and I lost track over here. So this is why we do one thing at a time. A lot of times students are panicked. They're afraid that if they don't correct something as they see it, they won't find it again. And I promise you that if it's a mistake that draws your attention, you'll see it again. It's the nature of painting. So no panicking, no, what's the word I'm looking for? No zero-sum game, right? Like fixing this won't ruin that necessarily, right? Like it'll still be there for you when you're ready for it. And welcome, Rob. How do you learn patience? I naturally rush through, I cannot speak. Naturally rush even though I try to slow down. Yes, that is an endless thing, Rob. And I mean, honestly, I think that's mostly what ateliers teach you is how to slow down, how to be patient. I actually think that rushing is a lack of knowledge on behalf of the student, right? The more you know and the more you train your eye to see, then the slower you have to go in order to apply that knowledge, right? So rushing to me is just a sign that you're new to the atelier training, that you haven't learned how to slow down, and that your eye isn't quite yet trained enough to see in a nuanced enough way. Because once your eye starts seeing it, you can't go faster, right? Like I'm an atelier trained artist. I've been painting for over a decade, right? And I'm doing this twice as fast as most students are doing it, but it's still a slow process to really render a sphere and to do it well, right? But great commentary. Thanks for sharing, Rob. Um, um, yes, and Ellen has a great point. If you actually do this, then you have mastered a level of patience that you probably didn't have before, right? And that's really part of atelier training is learning how to slow down because you have to slow down to see, and then you see better so you can slow down. It's like a synergistic effect. Of course, Rob. Feel free to ask away. We have a great community here. We're happy you joined us, and we have a very energetic and engaged community here. So welcome. Okay, so I'm just going to continue working along this pass. I got a little distracted. I'm not totally sure where I am. I might put down a bad color, but it's okay because we can always correct it. Oh, that was actually okay. Excuse me. All right, so that's feeling like I'm matching the color that was underneath it, and I needed it to be a little bit lighter. Remember, we're trying to spread the light. I almost feel like an evangelical. Spread the light, but we're trying to make the light feel brighter. Okay, so this got lighter here, but now this tile looks too dark in that transition. So I'm going to go back a tile. I'm going to lighten this tile, and then I'm going to darken the one I just put down. Just nuance changes. And then as we, again, approach our core shadow, it's a little bit lighter here. And this core shadow, instead of being an 8, is really going to end up more of a 7. Oops, I think that's too dark. Okay, how do I feel about that? I think that was too big of a jump into that shadow. I'm gonna just put one tile in between these two ideas. And I have a ridge I'm gonna knock down with my brush here. I mean, even though this can be tedious and you need patience to do it, what it does is it trains your eye so that you can do things much more quickly when you need to do things quickly. Like if you're out plein air painting, if you understand form at this level and you see a rock, you can put a few notes down on the rock before the sun changes on you and then turn the form knowing using your notes. Like all you need is like a highlight, a couple middle notes, a core shadow note, a reflected light note, and that's enough for you to tile and fill in the blanks, right? If you understand how form works. So this exercise truly is a combination between what you know and what you observe. Okay, so Rob is making a really great statement here. He's saying that my questions will be outside the scope of your tuition. I can't even paint the sphere yet. I want to know the most advanced techniques. If you're just joining us today, this can feel like a lot. But if you go back, we have like 12 hours of content starting from the very, very beginning, where I literally traced a roll of tape to start. And I suspect that you are capable of tracing a roll of tape. So even though you're jumping in at the more sophisticated part of this project, I think that if you start at the beginning of this tutorial, that you'll find that it's perfectly within your ability to do this. Anybody can do this. It's just a matter of, do they have access to someone that knows how to do it, that's teaching them? The answer for all of you is hopefully yes, right? And then you can go far with just that. But if you really want to train your eye, I cannot emphasize enough. You need to really train with an atelier trained artist that is giving you feedback on your artwork. That's what trains your eye that next level, right? Um, and welcome, Edie. Good to see you back. Ellen's saying, I'm thinking that I may set this up on another easel, come and go, work on other things for a break. Oh, no, that's totally fine. Absolutely. A sphere can make you mad, like angry mad, but also like crazy in the head. Like you can definitely like lose your sanity working on a sphere, especially if it's your first one, because there's so much thinking involved, right? Like this is a lot. We're thinking really hard here. So absolutely. Typically in the atelier, we work from a model or a still life project in the morning, and then something like this, like an academic project in the afternoon. So a master copy, which is one of the first projects you do in the online atelier that I teach, and then a sphere, things like this, right? So it's always great to have a couple projects going, because then you have your fresh eye for your other project, right? Like your eye gets burnt out here. Okay, no problem. Let's switch to another project. I can see sanity lost. LOL. Yes, me too, Helen. Okay, I'm just gonna. I have basically just a little bit more here that I want to fill in before we end for today. So I'm gonna focus on that. But I do have a special surprise for everybody today. I have a free gift for everybody. I figured out how to give away something on the live stream. So don't let me forget to give it to you once we finish this little triangle part. That feels a little bit bright for that space. Um, if you keep in mind that, so this is dark, light, and then it gets darker again before it hits the light, which means it's out of order. That's a sign that it needs to darken just a touch. There we go. All right. I'm trying to finish this section before we leave today, but also I don't want to do the thing that I'm always on my students about rushing, right? Like we want to be deliberate. It takes as long as it takes. Try not to give yourself arbitrary timelines like I'm giving myself right now. All right, we're approaching this core shadow. And remember that the light turns out really fast from the core shadow. Oh, that's too light. That's too dark. I need something in between. All right. So now I just have this skinny, skinny little triangle piece in there that I haven't quite gotten to. I'm going to do that, not in a rushed way, in a thoughtful, mindful way. And so Rob's asking, do you do standalone tutorials? Yeah, absolutely. So I actually have two channels. I have this channel, and I have a channel I started way, way back when I was running a nonprofit called the Da Vinci Initiative. So I encourage you to check out that channel. It has a really great drawing tutorial on how to draw a bark plate. And then also, I've started posting smaller tutorials. So on the School of Atelier Arts on this channel, there's like standalone, like 5 to 10 minute tutorials on color theory and some other concepts. And so I plan on, once we finish this big project, I'll probably go back to doing kind of little bits and pieces, just answering the questions that people email and write to me about. And give smaller chunk tutorials so we don't overwhelm people with big tutorials, right? It's interesting because that bark plate drawing class that's on the other channel, I did that over a decade ago, and now like people write me about it all the time. And so I'm hoping this is kind of the next step, transitioning from drawing to painting, working in Grisaille. So I really wanted this to be a building block to help those people that did the drawing class to have a next step. You got it, Rob. Ellen saying, I'm sure another camera setup is a huge and expensive ordeal. Just mentioning it. I guess another option would be a photo in the corner of your subject. That's totally true. And I am getting better at this software. I'm figuring out how to give a prize away today, but I'm realizing that I could also have it maybe float a picture in the bottom of my screen. So I'll try that next. I need your encouragement. I hate technology. My dad's actually a computer scientist, like back in the 80s. And like, I just never took to it. I'm the only millennial I know that's always calling my dad being like, why is my email broken? Oh, great. I'm glad that you joined the DaVinci one too. If you like these longer tutorials, definitely that drawing project on the DaVinci channel is really useful. And Marguerite saying she did the bark one 2 summers ago and learned so much. I'm so glad. I was going back and looking at that video and I'm like, I look like a baby because it was like a decade ago. I was shocked. I hadn't looked at it in a long time. Um, anyways, I'm going to finish this one last little triangle bit here, and then we're going to give away a prize. I don't know if it's really a prize because I'm giving it to everybody. There's no competition for it. I never won competitions, so I'm not a big fan of hosting competitions. I just like to give everybody the thing. I find competition stressful. Oh, that's a little dark. Maybe I'm too much of that trophy generation. Everybody's a winner. I don't know. I just feel like when it comes to learning and art resources, everybody should be a winner. Like I try to provide, I know that the critiques are behind a paywall in the online Atelier Painting Bootcamp, but I do try to provide quality training as best as I can. Balance the free and the paid content. I know that so many people are looking for this training, and I'm just trying to provide it as efficiently as I can. That's a little light. I got talking about prizes and then I lost my thought on the painting. That was too dark, too fast. You can tell I'm rushing, right? I'm making more mistakes. Mm. Okay, so we can see that this one triangle that we did today, it's feeling more like the white of the sphere. We're spreading the light this way. It looks like I missed a couple, just a couple tiles right here. It's a little dark. Okay, it looks like okay. We're gonna call that good. It looks like there might be just, I'm like, oh yeah, we're gonna call it good, but then I keep seeing just a tiny bit of darkness right here. Now, again, danger, danger. All right, it's really tempting to start smudging around, right? But we want this nuanced form. The last thing we want to do is ruin this beautiful form that we have here. Okay, so patience is key. This isn't a big change overall of what we did today, right? We lightened it maybe a half value step, but all of a sudden our sphere is going to feel white instead of a dirty sphere. Okay, so let's see here. I see, sorry, I've been missing out on the chat here. Uh, oh yeah. So Rob's saying that he just found out that you can't paint from someone else's photo references for a competition, but you didn't know. Yeah. But you know what? In atelier training, we almost always paint from observation. You're not dependent on photos. In fact, I strongly discourage photos. I only occasionally allow students to use it for a very specific reason, but they have to be their own photos, right? Because what happens is that a camera is not your eye, and a camera does not see the same way as an eye, despite what camera people like to tell us. And what's happening is that your eyes are seeing massive amounts of information in the 3D world. You have two eyes, you're seeing three-dimensionally, right? And then what happens is that when you take 3D information and flatten it to 2D, you're eliminating massive amounts of information. And a camera does that in a very specific way. An artist, an atelier trained artist, does it in a very different way. They make different choices than the machine, which is a camera, does. Now, there are some settings on your camera that you can change, but in my opinion, painters have far more flexibility in what they're able to change. We can change the edges, we can change the color, we can change, all these different things, which of course you can do post-production with cameras. But the point being is that we are taking 3D information and translating it into 2D in a very unique way. Like your painting is like a handwriting. Like the way you choose to translate that 3D world into 2D is unique to every single student. I can have every student set up a sphere and I can tell you exactly which student painted which sphere based on what I know about them, right? And how they interpret visual information and apply it, even though to a lay person, all the spheres look the same, right? That's unique to you. You have that. You don't have to develop a style. It's already in you. And it develops by learning techniques and picking and choosing the ones that most appeal to you and your vision. Um, okay. Okay. All right. That was my rant. I have a prize for you. I'm so excited because I just figured out how to do this. Okay. It's really just a gift. I don't know if it's a prize. So you can scan this or you can copy and paste the URL. And so I found a bunch of old slide lessons that I used to use to teach high school students with. And it occurred to me that it's useful for anybody that's learning how to do this. So this lesson is about keying values. It's about kind of making a value plan before you start and seeing the big ideas behind things. So you can scan this with your phone. You can type in the URL. This is recorded, so you'll be able to access it if you're like panicking and you can't find your phone right now. This will be on the School of Atelier Arts YouTube channel, so you can look it up there as well. So let me see here. And you're very welcome. I hope you enjoy it. It's really fun, especially because we're talking about values. This whole sphere painting, we're painting in grisaille. I'm dressed in grisaille. We have all these values things going on. And so this is just another way to think about values. It's actually the opposite. On the sphere, we're doing form with values, right? And this is considered like a flat value study. So it's a different way of approaching values, but I think it's a great contrast and learning opportunity between what we're doing in the sphere painting and other ways of thinking about values that you can do with your studies. And Ellen says she's patiently waiting. You don't have to wait to do portraits. People think that, I'm going to take this away here. People think that, oh, you have to do X, Y, Z before you get to portraiture. The best thing you can do if you want to be a portrait painter is paint master copies of portraits. That is the number one best thing that you can do for your learning if portraiture is something that you aspire to. And again, that's why the very first project that I teach extensively, just like I teach the sphere painting and the online boot camp, is a master copy. And your very first master copy can be a portrait if you so choose, right? It's just so useful to understand how other artists translate 3D world into 2D and learn from them instead of having to make everything up on your own. And welcome, Shirley. It's so great to have you. And thank you. Shirley's saying that there's some amazing worksheets that teach you how to draw portraits. Yes. So the School of Atelier Arts has a whole worksheet bundle that teaches you how to draw portraits and teaches you the overriding ideas, because a lot of people think that drawing portraits is about like eyelashes or the color of the eyes, but it's not. Like if you want a likeness of a person, the most important thing that you can do is get the relationship of the features to each other correct. And that's what I teach in these worksheets. Like I developed a whole series of 50 worksheets just to help you practice orienting the features to each other so that you can get a likeness. Peter's saying that the gift website is incorrectly written. Let me see if I can just punch in the URL into the chat. That's not what I want for you. Let's see. Lead pages. Okay, I'm gonna put a different link in here, but hopefully, hold on. Oh, it's because I didn't update it, I think. Thank you for your patience. This is my first attempt at doing this. View page. Okay, I'm gonna put the link in the chat, and I think it's because I didn't save it. So here's a link in the chat from me that will hopefully work for all of you. Yes, thanks. Thank you, Peter, for helping me with my technological ineptitude. Much appreciation to you. Please let me know if that link works before I end for today. I want to make sure you guys get your gift. And Ellen, going back to portrait painting and drawing, a lot of people try to paint from a photo. Like it's you'll learn a million times more. If you want to be a painter and you want to paint portraits, you'll learn a million times more from copying an old master portrait than you will from working from a photograph, because you'll see the shorthands that artist is using to create the illusion of form on the forehead and the eyebrows and the nose, etc. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Rob, for being here. I hope you join us tomorrow. We live stream every day at 9 a.m. until this project is done. And as you can tell, we have quite a bit more work to do on it. So, oh, it worked. Woohoo! Excellent. All right. I look forward to hearing what you guys think about it tomorrow. And I'm so glad. Thank you, Peter, for helping. I think I just I had created it, but I didn't press save, and so it was not allowing the link to go through, but it should go through now. Okay. Excellent, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. It was a pleasure having you. I hope you check out the School of Atelier Arts website. We have a great blog that has lots of mini lessons on it as well, with a lot more lessons that you can download, just like you downloaded this one. There's links all over the place to random lessons I've written throughout the years. So I hope you'll check out our blog. Please make sure to join our mailing list as well. If you downloaded that freebie, then you're automatically joining the mailing list, so you don't have to do it again. But I send out all my best resources through the mailing list. Anytime I'm trying a new lesson or whatever, it's my mailing list that gets it. So you don't want to miss out. It's our wildly popular mailing list, and I hope you'll join us in that community as well. All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.